Welcome everybody to our webinar today about looking after your mental health. So today we have Dr. Amanda Mullen presenting for us. She has a Doctor of Psychology. Doctoral research is published. So if you're that excited by looking at doctoral research, please look it up. And so it was peer-reviewed, and it was about a successful online program to treat anxiety and depression. And Amanda founded the award-winning Mindwork Psychology 6 years ago. Her desire was to make mental wellbeing accessible in the Hills District. And she's also founded Think Differently, which has come about as a result of demand from companies needing someone to speak and engage with their staff in wellbeing programs. Amanda's previously been invited to appear on Foxtel's Industry Leaders last year, and she juggles a passion for good mental health with running her own small business with 12 employees and having a young family. She claims not to be a superstar, don't be so modest, but she practices what she preaches, and that helps her navigate the challenges the world throws at her, and it's the same techniques she shares with other people. So that's fantastic. So would you like to share your wisdom, please, Amanda?
I would be delighted to. So let me just share a screen with you so that you can see what I'm talking about today. So I've put together a few slides, hopefully not going to bore you to death with death by PowerPoint, but did want to give you just something to read along with as I talk through some different things. So today when Brian asked me to come and speak, I wanted to talk about mental well-being during COVID. And the most important thing in that is to really think about recognizing whether you're in a good space or in a bad space. So what would it mean if you weren't? How can you recognize if things are changing for you or for your loved ones? Or if you're running a business, how do you recognize when things are going wrong for your staff? Because when things go wrong for your staff with their mental health, their productivity goes down. And right now, as we all struggle to manage COVID, it's really important that we keep productivity high. And one of the ways to protect that is actually to look after your staff's mental health as well.
Are you finding, Amanda, that having people work from home is impacting their mental health more than what they would normally have in the office?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the big things that I'm hearing from businesses is that when staff are at home, and I mean, much like myself, now I've got 2 children and a husband. My kids are on school holidays. And they're basically abandoned downstairs as I run the webinar. So that's what it's like for our staff, isn't it? They're juggling competing priorities. There's a lot of extra stress on the family. Sometimes people have lost jobs as well. So there's just a lot more going on than would normally be going on. So this isn't as simple managing a team remotely or just asking someone to work remotely. There's just a lot more going on than we would ever deal with in a normal situation.
Yeah, very good.
So when you're thinking about looking at mental health for yourself or for your staff, I've just made it into 4 sections for you to think about. So there's emotional changes, behavioral changes, physical changes, and also cognitive changes. So that's changes in the way that people think. And they're all kind of telltale signs that we need to do a bit of an early intervention or do something helpful. And on the end of this, I've just put in a couple of practical survival strategies that might help you as you navigate through. So why is it important? We know that COVID-19, working from home, juggling everything, is changing relationships and dynamics. So it's changing, our relationships with our children, our partners, it's changing relationships at work, and also it's changing the relationship that we have with ourselves. And as business owners and people who manage others, sometimes we don't take enough time to make sure that we are looking after ourselves. So what might be going on for you? You might be noticing that there's some attention demands coming from your children if you're trying to work from home with them there. You may notice there's a lot of time demands. No matter what age your children are, they demand your time. The younger your children are, the more of a problem that's going to be at the moment. Space demands. Not everyone is set up to have the space to work effectively from home. Open plan living is certainly fantastic, but less so when you need a confidential, private, or just quiet workspace. It can be really, really hard. Homeschooling, that's a whole seminar in its own, isn't it, with the issues in there. But even if we accept that homeschooling should only be for a couple of hours a day, the reality of that is who's going to entertain your child for the rest of the day? And if you're home, it's probably you or your partner.
Yeah, homeschooling's really interesting. I did an hour of homeschooling the week before the school holidays started, and that's all I could handle. So I don't know how everyone else is doing it. I'm just lucky that my wife is good at that stuff.
Yeah. Well, look, Brian, you're not alone. I mean, one of the big things that we're hearing through the practice is just how much parents are struggling trying to homeschool, what's appropriate. And I think it's really important to remember that we're not doing a homeschool. If we were doing homeschool, we'd be doing it very differently. What we're doing is just being quite reactive and trying to continue with a little bit of education, and that's quite different. So letting go some of that stress, or even understanding that it's there, that's important. And we mentioned before, there's rapid changes in the workplace. There's a lot of uncertainty with businesses at the moment, with JobKeeper and with the guidelines around the ATO. I mean, the legislation keeps on changing. There's new and evolving processes that need put into place. Even for me in my business, we've had 3 legislative changes go through in the last month. We've had to adapt to telehealth consultations and put in some physical distancing within a health practice. And all of those things are new. They're not things that I had a kind of game plan for or a textbook to follow, and I had to make most of it up. So that's a lot of pressure. And I think every single industry that I've worked in, they're talking about having to invent new processes, and it's a lot of extra work. There's changes to teams. If you've got a team of people and you've had to let some of them go or stand them down, it's easy to underestimate how that might be making you feel, because we're all humans. There's also the challenges in leading and managing a remote team. I mean, it's just not the same. And there's a big question for me when you are a business owner is, do you have support, or are you the one who's giving it to everybody else who's supporting you? And that's not just professionally, but that might be in your personal life too.
Yeah, it's so important that there's someone there to support you when you need it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And particularly with small business owners, which is probably a lot of your clientele, the small business owners tend to be a jack of all trades and the person who really does do it all themselves. They might not have someone to ask for help and support.
So you say it's really important for those people to have somebody somewhere in their life that they can go to and just talk things over.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And it's not just talking about mental health, is it? It's having a service such as like yourself, where they can come and get financial advice, or they can just find out some facts. So not having to do everything by yourself, being able to go somewhere to get information.
Yeah, but just that sounding board. So often people find if they're talking to somebody, the answer comes to them regardless. So just having that person to talk to or talk at, and then have the answer present itself to you. Absolutely.
It's really important, isn't it? And it brings us to, what do we actually need? And if we look at the self, we can often feel quite guilty, particularly, most small business owners put a lot of pressure on themselves, and they can feel guilty because they're exhausted and not getting enough done, when the reality might be that there's no way to get it all done. There's just no way to get ahead of the curveball that was thrown at most small businesses. You can be blaming yourself for being very inconsistent, feeling like one day you want to keep going with your business and the next day that you want to walk away from it. Or that one day you're loving homeschooling your children and the next day you don't want to borrow them. That inconsistency is really quite normal. And there's a lot of, obviously, financial uncertainty on multiple levels happening for people. And on top of that, if it wasn't enough, we also don't know what's going to happen here in Australia around COVID-19. Are we flattening the curve? It looks like we have. Are those figures real? Will they change? What will it look like in a month or 3 months or 6 months? So all of that uncertainty for our own personal health, our own families and how they're affected around the world, and how that flows into the business, it's easy to think that you're taking it in your stride, but actually for mental health, be taking a toll on you. And if your mental health wasn't being hammered at the moment, that would be kind of weird.
It's really interesting. Everyone I speak to, their biggest conscious problem they've got with it all is that there's no clear direction from the government. And every time you look at a news article, it changes. You know, it's going to be in a couple of weeks and they're going to lift restrictions. No, it's going to last for another 6 months. And the changing information seems to be really affecting people.
It does. So one of the big things we often talk about in psychology is sitting with uncertainty. You know, for me personally, a few years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I'm fine now, which is good. But one of the things that that's given me is a lot of muscle in terms of being able to sit with things that I don't know. You know, not knowing whether it'll come back, not knowing whether the treatment would be effective. And I think COVID is building that muscle in everybody else. You know, it's a muscle, the ability to sit and not know what's around the corner, but also knowing that whatever is around the corner, that you can manage it. Yeah, once you get the information. And it is a bit of a muscle skill, so don't expect yourself to be good at it instantly. It takes a bit of time.
Well, that's why you're here, man. You're going to be the steroids for us to build those muscles quicker.
Well, I like to think so. A little gym session this afternoon. So what does that look like? So look, how do you recognize when things are maybe not going so well for yourself? Recognizing changes in yourself and others, you know, I talk about them in terms of looking at emotional, behavioral, physical, and cognitive changes. So let's have a look at what that would actually look like for you or someone in your family or a member of your staff. So emotional changes would look a little bit like this. So you might find that you just feel, look, if you're a guy, and actually even if you're a woman, the most likely emotional change is that you're cranky, that you're just irritable. We often expect people who are starting to feel depressed to be crying and to be curled up in a ball, but that's not the nature of a small business owner or even a medium-sized business owner. That's not the nature of people who set up and run businesses. They're not curled up in balls in the corner, but they might feel overwhelmed and out of control, and they might be angry and irritable and snappy. And that's what I would expect to see more in the population of people that you would work with.
Yeah, and look, I suppose you've got to be careful to make sure it's not just because the kids are driving you mental, because every parent I know is that way most days when they've had enough of their kids.
Absolutely. We can all feel like that every day. So feeling emotional and having our emotions come and go is a really normal human experience. You know, our emotions are an important part of life. It's when they persist and when we feel stuck inside them and when we feel this way every day or most of the day, that's really when we start to think of it as being a problem. So when we manage staff, their emotional changes might not be the same as ours. So they might be very different. They might appear to just be lacking confidence. You know, you might start to see their self-esteem drop down, or that they start to feel really, really anxious about the work that they're doing. So they would be kind of the flags we look for in the staff that you're managing. And they obviously might be angry too, or a bit irritable. But if you're the boss and the manager, it's actually quite unlikely they'll be that way with you.
Yes, it seems to be that way, doesn't it?
Yes. So they might try to hide it. So you can look for the other signs, and that would tend to be the lack of confidence showing for them. You might be able to notice these in yourself. And again, these are really hard symptoms to notice for your staff. But again, if you've got a partner, a wife or husband at home, you might be able to notice some of these more physically based symptoms as well. You know, just feeling like you don't want to be intimate anymore with the person that you love. That's a bit of a telltale sign that you're far too stressed. You know, frequent colds and a weakened immune system, that's kind of scary at the moment as we come into COVID, but it's a side effect of stress. So watching what you eat, making sure, you know, are you gaining weight or losing weight? Is your blood pressure up? Do you get a lot of headaches? Have you got heartburn? What's going on for you physically? They're telltale signs as well. And people often underestimate the link between what's going on in their body and what's going on in their mind, but the two are highly correlated. We might also notice some cognitive changes. So, you know, for me, with my staff, I've definitely noticed some poor judgment of late. You know, just things that my staff would normally take in their stride. And also, to be fair, I've got a bit of poor judgment occasionally as well. And it's because we're under stress. So we're making silly mistakes. We're doing things we wouldn't normally do. And a lot of my staff, they're doing a bit of extra rumination and worrying. And they're procrastinating on things that should be done. They're just putting them off. Those are normal cognitive changes that we'd expect to see under stress. But they're also important to pay attention to because they are signs of stress. And if we allow them to persist, that means it can lead into a more serious problem and it might not resolve. And then we also have behavioral changes. So they're just the things that, you know, a lot of mental health, you know, it's pretty obvious when you step back and think about it. So if you're not doing well, we're going to see you become less active because you're going to want to spend all day in bed watching Netflix. You're probably going to eat more or less. And some of that's normal because we're all at home and the kitchen cupboard's there and everyone's eating junk. But we do start to see really big changes with that. You might notice changes in your sleep. You might not feel like being very sociable. So even though we're all self-isolating, you might find that you don't even want to catch up over, you know, over a house party or FaceTime or anything else, that you used to want to actually catch up with friends after work. Whether that's because we're all online all day, it's really hard to see what the impact is, but it is important to notice if you're becoming isolated more than you need to be with physical distancing. If you notice that you are using more alcohol, you know, if you go home at night and you need to have a drink to relax, or you need to take something to relax, then that's a bit of a telltale sign too. So when we think about it, you know, most of this information is just about becoming aware, recognizing the signs, knowing what's going on. Is there emotional changes? Is there behavioral changes? Is there physical changes? And is there cognitive changes? You know, just one or two, probably not going to be too much of an issue. But if you're seeing changes in multiple areas, or you're seeing a lot of changes in one area, it's really important to intervene early before things get worse.
Yeah, that's all also important to be aware of, Amanda. Would you suggest that it's good to keep a bit of a written record of these type of things so you get a bit of an idea of what the pattern is and you can identify the changes?
You can if you like. I mean, a lot of people like to journal. There's also, there must be thousands of apps in the App Store where you can just monitor your daily well-being. So look, it can be a good thing to do, but also even if you just sat here just now and took a few minutes and thought about and went back through some of those things that we talked about, particularly your daily activity, how much you're connecting, how much you're just doing basic well-being strategies, you probably have a gut feel as to how well you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you practice a little bit of mindfulness and start consciously thinking about how those things are for you, you should be able to pick up if there's any issues.
Absolutely. Look, the good news is that 80% of Australians, when they were surveyed by the Australian Psychological Society, so 80% of Australians, when they did the wellbeing surveys, reported that just wanting to change is actually the most helpful strategy in change. And, you know, I work doing private consulting for mental health, and I would say that that underpins my client base. People who are ready for change. When you're at that point where you want to be well, they're really easy to work with because they're ready to learn strategies. And the other thing is that sometimes we don't need to learn strategies, because in that same survey, 70% of Australians said that they did have knowledge about how to be healthy, but they didn't always do it.
On your experience, Amanda, have you found that those statistics bear out in reality, or is it a lot of people think something that may not be actually the way they are?
Well, I think that when we are under a lot of stress, it's all very well to know how to do something, but it can be really hard to get it done. And I think that's where, as a psychologist, where I really love that role. If I forward on to the next slide, you know, what it says is emotional well-being is our foundation. So when we think about the human brain, we can stuff it full of knowledge, and you can be as knowledgeable and as intelligent and as clever as you want to be. But how you deliver that through into the world, it's your emotional well-being that really affects the delivery. You know, it goes back to those staff that we manage. You know, if you have a member of staff and you've sent them on a lot of training courses and they know how to do the job, then there's something else going on when they don't do it. And most often what's going on is their emotional well-being. There's problems at home, or there's something else causing them stress and anxiety, and it's getting in the way of doing something that they actually know how to do.
Yeah, so as managers, we sort of become, responsible is not the right word, but we helping our team deal with their emotions becomes more and more important.
It does, and that kind of idea, isn't it, around emotional intelligence, being able to recognize what's going on for people, whether it's a knowledge base or whether it's actually emotional problems. It's increasingly important.
Yeah, I was reading something that I was saying that emotional intelligence is far more important than IQ when it comes to success in your endeavors. So yeah, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And also really important in terms of our relationships with people as well. So it's a big predictor of lots of different things. So we know that our emotions will influence our behaviors. So that's to do with how we'll act day to day, whether we'll get things done. Emotional intelligence, you know, our emotional well-being is also the glue for relationships. So not just at home, not just in those romantic relationships, but in the relationships we have with our children, and then the relationships again that we have with the people we employ, our suppliers, our contractors. Emotions are the glue for all of those relationships, whether or not we are aware of it. And they definitely, the reason for that is because they inform our thinking. And
yeah, it's so true.
Think. So let's have a look at that. So managing your mood, I've popped in here what I've called the basics. And that would be number one, just identifying the early warning signs. Some of those things that we already covered. The second one would be identifying what's triggering you. So if you've got a media feed or you're turning on the news, I mean, I personally don't watch the news. I do stay up to date with what's going on, but not by turning on the news, because it's pretty much filled with big headlines and horror stories. And that sort of stuff makes me really anxious. I prefer to get my information in the form of facts.
Yeah, that's so important, because I know if you look at any online newspaper, the first 5 articles on the feed will be something about COVID-19, and most of them will have, you know, the attention-grabbing headlines that are scary, designed to get people into it. So it really does put you on edge if you spend all day looking at the online news or even TV news.
It does, doesn't it? So
yeah.
I think just taking a step back and thinking about, well, how do I manage the flow of information to myself? It's exactly like running a business. You know, you wouldn't let yourself be interrupted all day long by staff having panic attacks over things that they don't need to. You would find ways to manage that. It's the same for us when we are identifying what's triggering us. It's looking at how do we manage the flow of information and get what we need without the panic. And that's true for everything, not just COVID-19, but even all the changes in the legislation as well, is important. So having a predictable rhythm and a routine can calm and reassure you. Now, if you're a parent, you know that for your children, but you know, our children's rhythms and routines have just been thrown out the window. So they are not in a predictable rhythm and routine, or good luck keeping them in one during New South Wales school holidays as well. But what does that mean for you?
Makes it very hard for everybody trying to manage kids and routine and manage your own routine when it's all thrown out the door, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
If you take a second and, you know, if you've got a piece of paper, this is a good time for you to think about, what did you give up when you were told to go physical distance? So if your routine normally involved going to the gym, then you just gave that up. What are all the little things that you did that was your predictable rhythm and routine? You know, did you go to a coffee shop on the way to work? Did you listen to music or podcasts? All of those things that used to help you feel really stable and calm and reassured as you went about your daily routines that you never thought about, most of those things have actually gone.
So true, yeah.
Yeah. So it's thinking about how will we rebuild them, not waiting for the world to go back to normal, but rebuilding our routines so that we feel calm and reassured, and we feel that things are predictable and we control as much as we can. That's a really important thing to do. Spend time with people you care about. I know it's only via house party or some social media app, but it's still important. So making sure you are connecting. Eat healthy food. I mean, we know this, right? But it's hard. And when we're stressed, we tend to eat the wrong food, but the wrong food can get in the way of your mental health. So it's important to keep your gut healthy. It's important to think about your diet and to make sure that you are actually eating well, because you might have had some changes to your diet as well because your routine's knocked out.
Such bad timing with this lockdown and Easter coming and all the chocolate being available.
It is, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Totally agree. Get enough sleep, so 7 to 9 hours. You know, make the time for regular exercise. And I don't mean make the time to go for a walk with your children. I actually mean make the time for yourself to have some regular exercise. That means going out without your children and going for a run or going for a faster walk.
Yeah, that one's really important, Amanda. I was taking the kids for a walk to give my wife a break, and it's not a relaxing walk because I don't know if all other kids are like this, but they non-stop talk the whole time, and I end up getting home more stressed than when I left. So yeah, it's a really good point to go by yourself.
Absolutely. So taking your children for a walk, I think it's important to let go the idea of walking there. You know, that's just spending time with your kids outside. And it's the same as when people take dogs for a walk. I mean, if I took my dog for a walk with the expectation that I could walk when he really just wants to sniff at everything, then I would get frustrated by the walking activity. So for me, if I want to go walking or running, I do it by myself.
I like the way you've grouped children and pets into the same category.
They're often similar, hey?
They are.
Cute and not willing to be rational. And I've also put on here, notice your self-talk, whether it's helpful or unhelpful. So a couple of the tips that I was going to add to this seminar are really around self-talk and how to manage it, because it's probably one of the most practical things that we can do that you might never have thought about doing, or you might never have needed to do it before because you might not have been under this level of stress before. And practicing relaxation. I mean, that comes with being by yourself. Yeah, having some space. Parenting is not generally a relaxing activity.
I had noticed that one, yeah. I think most parents have noticed that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a kind of a false thing, isn't it? Because we enjoy parenting, and normally we find things we enjoy relaxing. So we have a kind of false expectation that the two should always go together. And sometimes they do, but most often parenting is just filled with joy along with the hard work.
Yeah.
Not with relaxation at all.
Exactly. I'll just take this opportunity to let everyone know who's watching. If you go down to the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. So if you've got any questions, please put them in there, and Amanda will look to answer those as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a couple of tips called Wellbeing Tip 1 and Wellbeing Tip 2. So a true couple. Let's have a look. So Wellbeing Tip 1 is what we would call psychological flexibility. So, you know, prior to COVID, when I was doing a lot of resilience work for workplaces and working, you know, with individually with clients, one of the big things for us is psychological flexibility. What is it and why do you want it? And the easiest way that I find to describe it is it's a little bit like having physical flexibility. If you do yoga every day, other people are kind of jealous of the flexibility that you have. Your body probably is fitter and stronger and more able to do physical challenges than people who don't do yoga because of the flexibility. When you have psychological flexibility, you're just able to cognitively do a bit more than people who don't have it. So it fits well with emotional intelligence, and it's around flexibility in the way that you think, being able to adapt, being able to manage uncertainty, and being able to think in different ways. Having psychological flexibility, understanding it, means that we learn how to manage our internal self-talk. So if you think about the thoughts inside your head, essentially all day long there's a kind of highway in there, and instead of cars there's thoughts racing along it, just back and forwards all day long. Sometimes some of those thoughts are really noisy and capture your attention, a bit like a party bus going past, and sometimes they're just a bit more quiet. But the human brain is designed for survival, not happiness. And what that means is if you don't check in on your internal self-talk, it can often be quite unhelpful, because it can be survival based. It can be looking out for threats all of the time, and it can be a little bit judgy in there. Yeah. So I don't know about you guys, but when I get up in the morning and look in the mirror, I don't get up and go, wow, you're looking great today. I tend to focus on the bags under my eyes and the wrinkles that are appearing, because I'm human, and that's what we do. We look for the flaws, and we look for the things that we perceive to be risks to ourselves. And that's where our chat comes from. And it's not just when we look in the mirror, it's when we go to work, it's when we interact with others. Our internal self-talk just runs along, throwing out things that may or may not be helpful.
So to say, Amanda, with that, you need to become conscious of what's coming through your head and where there's something negative to pull yourself up and replace it with something positive.
Well, yeah, but that's kind of hard. I mean, just doing positive thinking is actually quite a hard thing to do. You're talking about, noticing your thoughts and just instantly replacing it with something a bit more helpful. And it can be done, but the problem in that is sometimes you don't believe the other thought. And if you don't believe it, it's not going to be very helpful.
Yeah, good point.
So because you're not, we're not stupid. Like, we know when we're just trying to trick our own mind. So you'll never get rid of the electrical chatter in your head. So I think the first thing I would say is just appreciate that most of your electrical chatter is nonsense. Most of it's probably negative. And rather than get rid of it, just accept that it's there, and focus on adding another layer on top of that, the things that are going to be more helpful. So what I mean by that, so this is what it looks like inside most people's heads. So it doesn't matter, who you are. This is what I think, maybe not exactly this, but for everyone I've ever worked with, whether they're an Olympic athlete, a CEO, a housewife, that sounds very sexist there, actually. But anyway, wherever you're from, whatever it is that you do, these are the thoughts that go through people's heads. So even if you're off to the Olympics, even if you are practicing, even if you're, planning to take down a gold medal, and the rest of the world would think you're pretty incredible and awesome, these are the kinds of thoughts that will be going through your head that will cause you problems, because they may take a second off your time, or even a microsecond off your time, and that might be enough to cost you a medal. These are also the things that just get in the way for the rest of us regular people as well, because every day thoughts like this roam through our heads, and if we don't check them, we can start to believe they're actually true. You don't have to share your thoughts, Brian, but you're welcome to if you like.
That's right. I was trying to hold back a sneeze.
So it's not about whether your thoughts are true, but it is about whether or not they help you to get what you want in your life. So it doesn't matter whether or not they're true, because you won't ever get rid of them, but you can choose to challenge them. And you can also choose how much attention you want to give your thoughts as well. So you don't necessarily have to pay attention to them.
I heard a few years ago, Amanda, that if you are in a bad mood and you make yourself laugh, even if it's not a real laugh, your brain doesn't know the difference. And if you do it for long enough, a couple of minutes, it can put you into a good mood. So with this self-chatter, if you did enough positive stuff, could you convince your brain that that's true, and then that sort of helps deal with the negative stuff?
Look, I don't know. I've been a therapist for a long time, so I do a lot of one-on-one work, and I'd say that's kind of hard. For most of us, our beliefs are pretty deeply ingrained, and they were put in there in childhood, and they're very hard to change. They can be changed, but it usually is done through therapy, like it's really deep therapy techniques. Well, what I would say is much more helpful is most of us don't really need to change our beliefs unless they're getting in our way. Most of us can, unless our beliefs are really interfering with life, most of us can actually get by just by not giving them too much attention, just not buying into them. They'll be like, I could believe, I might think that I'm the queen. And it's fine, I can think I'm the queen all day long, but if I start acting as if I am too, then that's
fair enough.
a problem. It doesn't really matter what your thoughts are. It depends whether or not they're getting in your way. So one way to manage your thoughts is just to notice that it's a thought and not a fact. So notice that you're having the thought that you're not good enough, rather than believing the thought that's in your head. So if we use the example there of me being the queen, I might think to myself, I'm the queen. Now that's quite different to thinking to myself, I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm the queen, which is a lot less believable. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, it's a nice little technique, and it just helps us to step back a little bit and not believe in the thoughts that are going through your head. Now, why that's important is if you have really strong negative thoughts, particularly when you're stressed, which is when they tend to pop up, they're going to be unhelpful. To be able to work in an emotionally intelligent way, you just have to look at Google and all of the work they've done in Google in building that amazing, beautiful campus to fill their employees with happy thoughts. So we absolutely know that you're going to do your best work when you're feeling either emotionally neutral or emotionally positive. So it's not going to be helpful for you to do your best work if you're feeling emotionally in a negative place. And that means shifting your thought content. So what would that look like? How do you shift these thoughts? So the first thing is you could do what's called a distancing technique, which is notice it's just a thought, not a fact. You could see if that helps shift you emotionally and how you feel. Sometimes that's enough to give you some space. If you're really stuck on your thoughts, you can ask yourself what a friend might say. And Brian, this goes back to you talking about having a trusted advisor, doesn't it?
Well, it does. It's always useful to have somebody that you can talk to that is positive, and they can pull you up when you're thinking negative thoughts, or start helping you look in the right direction, the positive direction, to get through that.
Absolutely. So why is it helpful for us to ask ourselves, what would a friend say? Because if you are having negative emotional content flood your body, so you're having negative feelings in your body because of your negative thoughts, your thinking isn't going to be so good. So asking yourself a question often helps switch you into a more emotionally neutral place where you can come up with some answers. And when you do that, it helps you move the emotional place until you're in a better place to cope with whatever the problem is. So you could ask yourself what a friend would say if you're not able to go hang out with a friend. You could ask yourself, am I catastrophizing this situation? What's the real evidence for my thought? Is it really true, for example, if we took this one, that you're not good enough? Could you find any instance of a time in your life where you are good enough? Is it really as black and white as your brain's trying to make it out right in this moment? Because nothing's black and white. What's your options here? You can just buy into it. So, okay, well, you're not good enough. You're a total failure. So what's your options now?
With those ones, it's interesting. I found in the past that if you write down the options and the thoughts, put it on paper, it helps crystallize it in your mind and show you that what you're thinking isn't actually correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, we call this in psychology evidence-based thinking. So it's just looking at the evidence base for our thoughts instead of believing that they're facts, because they're just actually electrical chatter inside our head. And the next question that I popped on there that can be really helpful is, what's a more helpful thought? You know, what could I replace this with? For me, you know, I only have one real problem thought. And it comes up whenever I'm at work, at home, or at the gym, when I used to go to the gym and get pushed really hard by a trainer. And the thought that pops in my head is always, I can't stand this. And it's not helpful. And it's not even true, because obviously I can stand things. I'm still here standing many, many things. So for me, I just always switch that thought up to saying, you know, when it pops in my head, I replace it with, I can stand it for 5 minutes. And that's enough. It's not magic. I haven't done a lot of work or effort, but my emotional content changes, and that allows me to keep going quite easily.
Oh, that's such a great tip. Yeah, that's really good.
It's a nice one. Look, that one, you know, I worked that one out when my kids were, I think my eldest was 3, and I had a newborn, and it was pretty stressful, and I'd get to that witching hour time of the day, and what would be in my head is, I can't stand this. And, you know, even on those days, I'd switch it up to myself and say, well, I can stand it for 5 minutes. And that would just give me the patience. And often in those 5 minutes, my kids would just calm down a little bit. Or I'd work out what to do, you know, pop them in the bath or the shower or somewhere where they could be quiet and self-soothing a little bit better.
Yeah, that's a great tip. That's such a great tip, Amanda.
Yeah, like that's one of my favorite tips. And most of us, smart as we are, I only have one problem thought. It's the same one. That one comes up no matter where I go. So I would encourage you to think about what runs through your own head. You probably only have 1 or 2 thoughts that cause you problems all of the time. And they're probably the same at work as they are at home. And when you know what they are, you can change them really easily. My second tip for today is working smarter. You know, there's a lot going on. If we go back to all of the uncertainty around COVID-19, all the changes that everyone's having to make in the workplace and in their personal lives as well, it's really important that we work smarter when there's a lot more work to be done, instead of just working harder. And that's because right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. And I can't say, you know, more strongly that for me, you know, as a human being and as a psychologist, this is something no one's ever lived through before. So having a little bit of self-compassion and making some space, you know, this is a moment in history. And people will ask us, you know, how do we handle ourselves through it? What do we do? And I think it's unrealistic to say, well, I just went on as normal and pushed myself harder. I think that's not a very self-compassionate or self-aware response to have. But working smarter, one of the ways that you can do that is to give up multitasking. So there is numerous studies, like so much evidence, that human beings can only do one thing at a time. I know nobody ever believes that, but the research really does prove it. Even when the researchers take people who think they are fantastic at multitasking, they just prove that when you do one thing at a time, you do it better. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's always been my experience, but now I can tell my wife that she can't multitask. She tells me she can.
Well, we might try to. But, you know, if you think about productivity at work, it often comes from batching. You know, if you think about even an accountancy practice, that would come from batching tasks together. We know that single tasking leads to increased productivity across all industries. And therefore, it makes sense that if we single task ourselves, that we would become more productive and less stressed too. It is easier said than done, particularly if you're juggling work, children, and physical distancing. So what it does mean, though, is you can also learn how to effectively direct your attention to chosen tasks. That means you can reduce your anxiety. So if you're only focused on one thing at a time and you're good at managing your attention, you can actually turn off a lot of the worry and the unhelpful thoughts inside your head by managing your attention really, really effectively. And that's an important thing to learn.
Yeah, and on that, I'd say these things, these mobile phones, it's good to put them somewhere that you can't access it for a little while, because they're probably the most distracting and intrusive things that we have at the moment.
Absolutely. There's a lot of evidence, like in some of the research studies that have shown that even having the mobile phone on your desk, even having it around you, if the moment that you have put it anywhere near you, it interferes with your attention stream. So you don't have to have it in your hand for it to be interfering, it just needs to be near you on the desk. So if we learn how to do single tasking, why would that be of great benefit? One is that we'd be more proactive, we'd be choosing to manage our workflow so that we become more productive as well. So we can be a lot more proactive in how we manage our day. And that's good for our mental well-being because we feel like we have control. So it's thinking about our day, coming back to building those nice routines for ourselves. If you've got a lot of new things happening, new processes, new policies in the workplace, new ways of doing things, building that back, thinking about how you will move things so they're batched, so you're single tasking again, so that your time is efficient. And that might take you a few weeks of adjusting until you get back into a really good workflow. And the other thing you can do is train your brain by doing some mindfulness training. So I'm not going to train you on mindfulness techniques today, but mindfulness techniques are used by some of the most, incredible people in the world, and they're used by some of those people for a reason, and that's because it works. So all of the research around mindfulness shows this. It improves your performance, it reduces your stress, it increases your emotional intelligence. Apparently you become more satisfied with life, and that's definitely worth having. Your leadership skills will improve, your focus and your concentration will get better. You'll become more self-aware, which links in with that emotional intelligence. You tend to have better relationships, and that's great. And your sleep improves, and not least at the moment, we know that practicing mindfulness, because it reduces stress, one of the side effects of it is that your immune system can get a boost as well. And that's so important, at the moment in terms of facing down these viruses as well. So if you do want to do something, I would suggest that you could learn some mindfulness skills. In addition to applying a couple of the tips that I showed you, learning mindfulness, if you've got the time to do it at the moment, would be the single most effective way to manage your stress.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point, Amanda. With all those benefits of increased mindfulness, it'd be hard to see why anybody would not want to take the time to develop their skills in that area.
Well, that's true, but most people just think it's incredibly boring, and that's why they don't do it.
Well, they think that about accountancy as well, but they're wrong.
Well, look, I think mindfulness, it's different when you learn it. So it's not meditation. It's about focusing your attention, and it's about letting go of judgments and learning how to manage that brain muscle. It's quite different. So I'm going to just pop in a little bit of information about some of the stuff that we do, and then we can open for any questions if there is any. But if you did want to find out about mindfulness, look, you can go almost anywhere. If you did want to come to us, we offer a huge amount of both online and in-person training around mindfulness, both for adults and for children, and in addition to all the other mental health things that we do. So you can find all of that information on our MindWorks Psychology website as well. But that was all I really wanted to say. This wasn't to be a big plug for me. So if you want more, you can get my information from Brian. But it is important to remember that you might not be able to control COVID-19 and the changes it's having to you or to your business, but you can definitely change and control the way that you think. And that's really where psychology sits in terms of mental well-being. We can control it and we can change it, and there's always things that you can do if you're struggling.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I think it's worthwhile mentioning the telehealth service that you offer as well, Amanda, so people don't have to come in and see you if they need to get some help.
Yeah, that's true. So like most practices, we offer telehealth now for all the clients. So I actually have a team of 9 psychologists in my own small business. And and they all offer telehealth services now, just like this, where we talk by video and screen share. We don't use Zoom because it's, as you probably know, there's been a lot of chat around Zoom, but we do use some health encrypted services. But we are also still open for face-to-face consultations because mental health is essential. So you don't necessarily have to use telehealth, although it's safer. If you need to, you can actually still walk in and see psychologists across lots of practices in Australia too.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Thanks, Amanda. And if anyone's got any questions, please put them into the Q&A box and we can answer those. And I think realistically, it's a no-brainer if anyone's got any areas of their mental health that they feel they need some help with, that it'd be a no-brainer to get in touch with Amanda and get some help with that. Because you've got to remember that your most important asset is you. So, and that for a large part is your mind, which you need to look after.
Yeah, look, I really couldn't have said that better myself. You know, looking after our mental well-being this year has never been more important, and making sure that we take some time now to get the skills. Most of us as small business owners, we're probably already resilient. We probably have a really good set of mental well-being skills, but they've never been tested as much as now. So don't be afraid to reach out and get some help and support.
Exactly. Okay, so if anyone's got any questions, please put them in now. Otherwise, we'll wrap up and let everyone go home a couple of minutes early. All right, well, if there's any questions that you think of after this, I'm sure you can touch base with Amanda and she can look for a way to get back to you. So thank you very much, Amanda, for appearing on the presentation. Thanks, Peter, for the comment. Excellent presentation, Amanda. Thank you. So you've done well. You've helped at least one person, which is the aim of the game. So thanks very much, Amanda. We really appreciate your time today, and hope you get through this as well as possible as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Good day.